Welcome. I'm Jennifer Wisdom with Global Women for Women, and I'm so excited to talk with you today about millennials and the workplace. We have so much good stuff to share with you, and thank you. Really appreciate you joining today. A little bit about me. I am licensed clinical psychologist and board certified business and organizational psychologist. I do a lot of stuff with, for, and about millennials, including I'm editor publisher of the Millennials Guide series, which includes Millennials Guide to Management and Leadership, Millennials Guide to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, and forthcoming we have Millennials Guide to Millennials Guide for the Working Parent, and Millennials Guide to K through 12 Education. In any case, a lot of stuff for millennials, and I focus on the workplace issues, and I have other amazing authors who focus on other aspects of millennials. So for today, I want to chat a bit about understanding generations, and I'll walk us through, these are the 5 generations that are currently in the workplace, and talk about how those intergenerational issues can affect what happens in the workplace, and especially areas of conflict that can come up related to intergenerational issues. And this is just the first part. Next week, we'll have the second part, which goes into more depth around what millennials and Gen Z are looking for in the workplace and how workplaces can be more effective with millennials and Generation Z. So let's get started. So we have the oldest group in the workplace right now, traditionalists. These are folks who were born between 1900 and 1945. They came of age during the Depression, Great Depression, and World War II. They are seen as disciplined and having high workplace loyalty. And non-ironically, the technology that came about during their early years was vaccines. Hopefully we'll see that come around again. Baby boomers were born between 46 and 64. They're named for the baby boom that happened right after World War II ended in 45. They came of age with Vietnam, with the moon landing, with civil rights and women's rights, and they are seen as being experimental and innovators, as well as being hardworking. And the big innovation in their lifetime is the personal computer. And I should say my mom is on the early end of the baby boomers, and she still tells me what a thrill it was and how amazing it was when the first family on their street got a color television. So kind of thinking about it puts things in perspective for those of us who are younger generations around. These are still folks in the workplace for whom color TV was a big thing when they were kids. So just kind of perspective is what I'm looking at here. Gen X, this is my generation. Never really liked being called Gen X, but it's growing on me finally. We were born between 65 and 79. We came of age with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. And we are seen as independent, as free agents. And we came of age with the dawning of the internet and MTV and AIDS and the mobile phone. Although back then, in the late 80s and early 90s, the mobile phones were like brick-sized, huge. There's a picture, there's some in the movie Pretty Woman, if you've ever seen that. Huge mobile phones, very unlike what we have now. Next up is millennials. It's our group of focus today. So these are folks born between 1980 and 1997. Sometimes it's viewed as 80 to 2000. Essentially, these are folks that came of age with 9/11 and then recession and now pandemic. So this is an extremely resilient audience. I'm so excited about working with millennials, in part because of their incredible resilience. They are really focused on and known for community service and social awareness. They are very focused on immediacy. They want things now, don't want to wait. Also seen as very confident and diverse. The big innovation in the millennials coming of age time has been Google and Facebook and the real expansion of the internet. Again, thinking back, just my mom, baby boomers, where color television was a big thing. Now we have all the information in the world available at your fingertips, and this is normal for millennials. This is great, especially the younger millennials. And then for Gen Z, this is a group that was born after 1997, after 2000. These are folks that are optimistic, generally seen as having high expectations. Everything's about apps and social games. And the innovations so far are around Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, different ways to share information that are really different. Again, going back to baby boomers and traditionalists, and even when I was a kid, we would just go to the library and look up the encyclopedias. Nobody has encyclopedias anymore because every single thing you need is available online. So got a real big difference. As you're thinking about how we grew up and what happened when we were in our 20s for each of these groups, with millennials currently being 20 to 40, these are very big differences. And it has an impact on how things work in a workplace when people have these different values and different experiences. So let's go through that part here. I'm going to talk about applications to the workplace. So I mentioned the traditionalists. These are the oldest folks in the workplace. They tend to value authority and top-down management. You can see already where this is likely to create some sort of conflict with millennials and Gen Z who don't necessarily value authority and top-down management. Traditionalists tend to be hardworking and this kind of make do or do without focus, which leads them to see many traditionalists view the younger generations as spoiled because, again, these are folks that they didn't even have color TV. Many of the traditionalists didn't have black and white TV, much less phones and air conditioning and flights and all the things that we younger generations absolutely take for granted. So it makes sense that people who grew up with these very different experiences would see us as spoiled. Totally makes sense. At the same time, that can create conflict in the workplace. Baby boomers, they tend to expect some deference to their opinions. And again, that's setting us up for conflict here with younger generations who may not have that same perspective. Baby boomers have generally been seen as workaholics. They also have been in workplaces where the more they work, the more they benefit. And you're probably familiar with some of the differences in what the workplace was like in the 60s and 70s compared to now. So a few examples of back then, there were essentially defined benefit retirement as opposed to right now, which is a defined contribution. Defined benefit means that you work a certain amount for the company and you get a pension, which is X number of dollars that's set. So that as long as you work this amount, you will get X number of dollars every month for the rest of your life. Whereas now it's a defined contribution. The company says, I will contribute X amount of dollars to your retirement. And if it all gets lost, oh, well, that's not on us. So it's a very different level of security that employers provide for individuals, and that's much less security. Also, many of us, if you're millennial or older, you've probably experienced a number of recessions where bunches of people got laid off. And many workplaces are also, many large employers are also shifting a lot more to consultant structures where benefits aren't included. So there's a very different workplace structure. So many baby boomers have a focus of job loyalty because their employers have been very good to them. And again, I'll use my mom as an example, one of the older baby boomers, where she worked for a company for 30 years and then had a pension for the rest of her life. So that's a very different situation than many younger generations experience. Baby boomers also expect many aspects of work to be understood without discussing them, that people should just know how things work. And that also creates a lot of conflict there. For Gen X, for my generation, we tend to be comfortable with authority. We don't necessarily value it or provide a lot of deference to older people, but we try sometimes. And we are a generation that will work as hard as we need to, as long as we understand why. Again, conflict here because some of the older generations, older than Gen X, feel like we should just do the work, but why do we need to understand why? And then, of course, Gen X is known for starting the importance of work-life balance, mainly because we saw our parents work their fingers to the bone to provide for families and not to have a lot of work-life balance. Millennials tend to believe that respect should be earned. It's kind of a what have you done for me lately perspective. And they have a large focus on social causes. I have talked with a lot of clients who are millennials who are very concerned about the social awareness of their corporation, their organization, their company. And if the company starts doing things they don't agree with, if it doesn't respond quickly enough to support Black Lives Matter, or if it is doing too much investing in fossil fuels or things like that, they want to move. They don't want to work for a company that doesn't share their values and social causes. So that's something that millennials are bringing to the workplace that I think is very underappreciated. Millennials also tend to be very technologically savvy and goal-oriented. And this is contrary to what some of the older generations think, that all millennials are listless or lazy or whatever. Millennials do tend to be somewhat less savvy about conflict, about interpersonal conflict, and they absolutely want feedback and positive work relationships. And again, you're seeing potentials for conflict here, where millennials want feedback from their bosses, and bosses may feel like that means they're needy, which I operate from a perspective as someone who works in management and leadership, that everybody needs feedback. And just because baby boomers didn't get feedback doesn't mean they shouldn't have. And I don't think millennials are necessarily needy on feedback. I think they're looking to improve and to do things differently. And it would be helpful to provide more feedback to this group. Gen Z, little fear of power. Again, the baby boomers who expect deference because they're older. Gen Z does not compute, not interested in that, not aware of that. They tend to be full digital natives. Some of the older millennials are not quite digital natives because they came of age when things were still transitioning. But Gen Z, everybody came of age with the full internet, and that's delightful and scary at the same time. Gen Z tend to do a lot of multitasking, which can be good and bad. They tend to be fast decision makers, also good and bad. And they tend to expect diversity. So this is a generation that literally it does not compute when they hear about a lack of diversity or trying to understand why it's a big deal. They expect diversity to be in place for workplaces, which is a good option for workplaces to pay attention to this and to keep their Gen Z folks and their millennials in line and employed. Gen Z is very socially connected, which again can be a challenge for workplaces. Many older generations view workplaces as, this is where we come to get stuff done. We're not friends. We're not socially connected. We're just working. And Gen Z wants things differently, as do millennials. They also want feedback. And then Gen Z, as well as many millennials, have side hustles and student loans, which can be perceived by baby boomers and traditionalists as lacking job loyalty. So now let's look at this again. Baby boomers, traditionalists grew up with pensions, defined benefit plans. They could go to college for, $400 a semester, did not graduate with $50,000 in student loans. Whereas Gen Z and millennials are saying, I have student loans to pay off. I can't even afford to buy a house or get an apartment or start a family because of these student loans. So if the workplace isn't going to provide this for me, I need to do a side hustle. I need to do some other way to find some other way to take care of myself. So they have these other issues going on, which totally makes sense for them, but which can be seen as contrary to job loyalty. So these are just a couple of the books that I've worked on related to millennials. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here and follow up and take some questions from the group around millennials. This is just getting us started on what the generations are and what's important to different generations in the workplace. Go ahead and put any questions or comments you have in the chat, and I will get to those, or you can unmute yourself and just toss them out there. One of the questions I get a lot is, how can the older generations and the younger generations work together in the workplace? And one of the key things, the first thing, step one for any intergenerational work in the workplace is don't allow conversations about age that can potentially be perceived negatively. For example, in many workplaces, people will say things like, you weren't even born when 9/11 happened, or I'm old enough to be your mother, or okay, boomer, or those kinds of things. That is really tough in a workplace because those really accentuate and emphasize the differences between folks, and it makes it just kind of adds a layer of disrespect that's really hard to overcome in a workplace. when that gets started. So kind of step one for intergenerational communication and conflict in a workplace is to not make those kinds of comments and to not tolerate that. I mean, I've certainly been in a workplace where someone told me, I'm old enough to be your mother, and she reported to me, I was her boss. It makes things a little uncomfortable. Some of the other things that can be helpful in workplaces are for all generations, ask questions of other generations. So there's a lot of strong feelings about, for especially the older generations who feel that they know all the stuff, and who are these young people today? Like, there's a lot of that kind of tension around there. But when you ask the other folks first, tell me about this, or help me learn this, or help me understand this, it really can help you build relationships with folks. And that's really important. I find that the older generations typically are very curious, but also don't want to ask about the technology, about trends, about musicians, artists, things like that. And that's a place where young people can share, not in a way that they're putting people down for not knowing this stuff, but just share. And then I find that young people often in the younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, often vastly underestimate how much the older generations can teach them about things like politics. And I don't mean politics like political parties, I mean politics in the workplace. So those are places where younger generations would really benefit from talking to older people in older generations about politics in the workplace, about how did this happen this way, about what exactly happened in this meeting, or why is this person doing this? And really, there's a lot to learn in that area as well. So making it a point to learn from other generations, especially younger to older and older to younger, is really important. And then Gen Xers like myself, we're always caught in the middle. We're like the middle child here. And Gen Xers tend to be invisible in the workplace, which is very interesting. For the books that I'm working on, there's a lot of millennials books, which is where we started. We have some Gen Z books. I even have a couple of baby boomers who want to write for those generations, and not a single Gen Xer wants to write this. So I find that very funny. Remember, type any questions you have about millennials in the workplace in the chat, and we can keep talking about whatever is of interest to you. I get the question a lot also around, I'm a younger person in the workplace. Most of my colleagues and bosses are older. How can I earn their respect? How can I get them to listen to me? Great question. Great question. This happens a lot. I think the first part to address that is set expectations, where it may not be because you're a millennial that they're not really listening. It could be because they just don't tend to listen to people generally. I've had that experience in workplaces, both as an employee and as a young person, and as a supervisor, and as a consultant who works with people. So it could have nothing to do with your age. It could be completely about the other person. That said, a lot of times managers and bosses don't always listen to good ideas from other people. I tend to find, clearly I'm very focused on this, but I tend to find that there are often a lot of good ideas from other people in the audience, just other people in the workplace. Just because I'm the most senior person or whatever doesn't mean I have a monopoly on all the good ideas. So if you're a young person trying to understand the intent, what's the intent of what we're trying to accomplish here, that can help you provide an in to be able to share some ideas of how you can reach that intent. Now, be aware that sometimes when you're trying to understand what that intent is, the more senior people can take that as a challenge. Like, who are you to ask me what we're really doing here? That could come across in a not great way. But generally, once you try to understand more about what's happening and think about how you can be helpful, that would be nice. The other part is to just ask, what would you like from me? How can I serve you? How can I serve this project? How can I be helpful to you? And sometimes that will trigger people to say, oh, well, let me know ideas. And then they'll be more open to hearing ideas. Sometimes they'll say, I just want you to sit there. Okay, I can sit here. That's unfortunate, but okay. And that happens. Millennials tend to feel underappreciated at workplaces, which is not surprising given that they are the most highly educated, the most technologically savvy, the most globally focused generation so far. And they tend to be underemployed. So it makes total sense that they're underappreciated, which is often why millennials tend to have a lot of job hopping, which makes older generations see them as disloyal when the millennials are just doing what they need to do to get their needs met, which totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. So if you are a millennial in that environment, trying to understand how you can contribute and what your opportunities are, not just for advancement, it's not just about the title and the salary, but how you can learn in the environment. If you are a supervisor or a boss or a person who's a Gen Xer or baby boomer or traditionalist in that environment, and you have a bunch of millennials, try to help them learn, help them see what happens, and understand that millennials tend to come in with a high level of confidence, which can often make it challenging to mentor or to be a boss there, because it's like they're coming in feeling like they know everything. So, all right, I'm just going to back off. But that's not necessarily the case. And of course, they don't know everything, just like we don't know everything, just like we didn't know everything when we were in our 30s and 40s. But there are opportunities there to be able to work with that. And that gets back to what I mentioned at the beginning around removing those kind of stereotypical opinions and comments about, all millennials are this or all baby boomers are that. Taking all that out would be really helpful.